Good afternoon, everybody, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world or in the country. It's Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore with another of our virtual events tonight. And we're really pleased to have our good friend Mike Lupica back with us to talk about his brand new book, Robert B. Parker's Stone's Throw. And joining us also is an up and coming, we usually like to kind of preview these unknown writers in the program as well. No, also, our very good friend Harlan Coben is stepped in to talk to Mike today. And this is we still have a few signed copies of his most recent book. And then yours, Match, I believe is the title, right, Harlan? It comes out next March, I think it is. Yeah. And Barbara, of course, is at her home office. And just for everybody watching, I'll be monitoring the comments field on Facebook. So if you have questions for Mike or Harlan, go ahead and put them in, and I'll reemerge when I'm summoned towards the end of the hour. So over to you, Barbara.
I always wanted to be like a stage director. So finally with Zoom and Patrick, I have my opportunity. Anyway, I'm going to drink a toast to you, Mr. Lupica, because it's your new book. Congratulations.
Thank you. Wait, hold on.
I inspired him to go out for alcohol.
Yeah, no, Taylor, this is just grape juice, honey.
Well, our events are BYOB. I think Harlan and I had that discussion when we did our Zoom event for Win last week. So, I mean, it's 8 o'clock. It's after dinner for you guys, but it's just cocktail time for me. And
5 o'clock someplace.
I love it. John Sanford is driven into town, so he's taking us to dinner after we're through. So this is a dizzying social round in an otherwise fairly pallid and uneventful life, which we're all kind of going back to. So before you take over, Harlan, I do have one question, which was going to reveal the vast depths of my ignorance. But I grew up in Chicago, never went east, went west to college, the whole bit. So I have no idea whether Paradise, Massachusetts in any way resembles any place in New Jersey. I mean, are there commonalities that you two can explore?
Commonalities between Paradise, Massachusetts and places in New Jersey? No place like New Jersey, Barbara, you know that. There's no place like New Jersey. There's no place like Massachusetts either, for that matter. My dad was born and raised in Massachusetts, and I have a lot of relatives from Massachusetts. I went to college in Massachusetts, but it ain't New Jersey.
Okay, well, I knew it. See, from my perspective, it's all so small that I feel like you guys should just be one, kind of piece of land. I mean, I say to British authors that the entire British Isle fits into Arizona with extra room to spare. So with that mindset, it's easy for me to believe that Paradise and New Jersey could be the same, but
well, it's
obviously not.
My little county in New Jersey, which is not so little, but space-wise, it's tiny. Bergen County, New Jersey, has more people than North and South Dakota combined.
I love that. And speaking of which, I apologize because I meant to ask you this first. Are you okay after Hurricane Ida? Was any damage done to where you are?
A lot by me, but not to us. So it cleared up fairly fast. There was one picture in all the papers of this right down the street here was up to forever. And 2 nights later, I was eating at the outdoor restaurant there, so didn't see much damage. So I'm hoping for the best. Yeah. Where we were, luckily and fortunately, and knock all kinds of wood, we were not hit that bad. But a lot of the state was obviously.
Yeah. No, it sounded really awful. And Mike, you're in Long Island. So, did the storm kind of go around you?
No, we were never in peril from that one. But a couple of weeks before, Henri, which my wife refused to call that, she called it Henry. We were out on Eastern Long Island, and we were supposed to be directly in the path of it. And the day before, you can't believe the line of traffic leaving this part of the world and heading back towards New York City. Harlan, we were playing the Artist Writers softball game that day, which is, as you know, a seminal event.
Yes.
Every summer. Spoiler alert: the artists won, Harlan. Here's why they won: because they're younger and better, and you can't go wrong with younger and better in sports. And
it's not fair, though. It's not fair that they're younger and better. That's
right.
Not,
and so it's a 5-minute ride from our house to the field. It took me a half an hour that day just because everybody was leaving, and then it just changed course, and it hit Connecticut and it hit Up Island a little bit. But in answer to your question, no, we were really lucky, Barbara.
Well, I'm delighted to hear that. You know, Robert Parker showed a lot of genius in calling it Paradise Mess. I mean, a great tagline is Trouble in Paradise, you know, which probably, was that ever used as one of the book
Yes,
titles?
it was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, I thought it was. But anyway, I do think that, you know, he set things up by using Paradise as a name for an awful lot of great stuff. Parker had a really wicked sense of humor. I miss him. You know, we used to drink at the Arizona Biltmore before his events. And I remember one day I got an email from Putnam after we'd hooked Bob off the stage at 8:30 because the signing line was so long. And they said to me, "You must be entertaining some other Robert B. Parker, because this is not the Parker we know." But he really, you know, he really enjoyed it when he got here, even though he didn't love doing live events. So did you guys both know him? Did you meet him?
Yeah, I knew him pretty well. I was to the famous house that he shared with Joan in Cambridge. I believe it was on Ash Street. And we would show up and do Mike Barnicle's radio show back in the days. And I think I told you this story. I think I've told Harlan this story. And every once in a while, we'd end up in the same city on a book tour. And one time we ended up in Washington, and we were staying in Georgetown, and we just ran into each other in the lobby. And he said, "Mikey," he called me Mikey. He said, "Mikey, let's have dinner." I said, "Great." And he said, "What time's your signing?" And it was 6:30, and I forget where it was. And his was, I think, in Politics and Prose at 7 o'clock. I said, "Bob, what time do you want me to make a reservation for the restaurant back here?" He said, 8:15. I said, "Well, wait, you're signing you're talking and signing at 7. How are you going to get back here at 8:15? He said, "Mikey, let me explain something to you. At 8 o'clock tonight, if I'm between Robert B. and Parker, I'm out of there." and we had dinner at 8:15 that night.
As I said, if Putnam was really serious, of course, by that time he perfected the circle signature, which Michael Connolly subsequently adopted. If you all paid attention, you know, it's kind of like, so he could sign books with enormous rapidity.
He was great fun to know. Harlan knows he was just big fun to know. He had a big personality. I could still go back into my laptop and find, you know, the tortured Red Sox emails, Harlan, before they won. And then the tone of them changed substantially after 2004.
They did. We used to actually have conversations about whether either one of us would live long enough to see either the Red Sox or the Cubs, which is where I grew up, win a pennant. And I'm pleased to say that both of us managed to survive long enough to do that. He was a wonderful Red Sox fan, wasn't he? He was the super hometown booster. Harlan, why is there a baseball team in New Jersey that I'm overlooking?
No, we got the Yankees and the Mets, but you know, I'm probably closer to the Yankees and the Mets than most people are to whatever team that they're cheering for. Yankee Stadium is probably 15 miles away from me.
Yeah.
So it's commuter baseball, basically.
Yep, and that's why they play the Giants, and the Jets play in New Jersey, right over the border. But they're
Harlan, how far is the stadium from where you and Ann live?
If there's no traffic, I can get there in 15 to 20 minutes.
Right.
No, there's never no traffic during game day.
On Sundays, right.
It's actually very, very easy for me to get to Giant Stadium. I have a back way of going. So right down 17, you know, I've been to plenty of times I was at the very first game at Giant Stadium when it opened in 77, I think it was. They were terrible back then, as Mike knows, and he covered them back then. And all I remember is like they were playing the Cowboys, who always killed them in those days. And that announcer, what was his name, Mike, who did it for 100 years? And it would just be, every play would be off tackle by Kota, stopped by Harvey Martin, no gain. It was like 100.
No game
on the play.
How do you like the new place? I call it the Big Ugly Gray Bowl.
It's awful.
It's awful, right?
It's like everybody built these gorgeous, and I went to, I know we're not talking about things, but people will get interested. Jeff Fiegels, who was one of the greatest punters of all time, lives here in town and is a close friend of mine. And they let him, when he had his retirement party, have it at the new Giant Stadium before it was open. So we were all excited to go there. We were the only ones there. And I'm like, what the hell were they thinking with all the gorgeous new stadiums all over the country? It's like, how can we make it look like we're in the swamps of New Jersey?
They could have built any kind of stadium they wanted, and they built this ugly gray bowl that could have gone anywhere. And there's absolutely nothing remarkable about it, the way, well, there hasn't been anything remarkable about our team for quite some time.
You know, it's funny, you'll get a kick out of this. So, you know Jeff Fiegels and his great career and,
Sure.
and all that. But there's a famous play when he was in Philadelphia where Trotter took his head off on a play and almost seriously injured him. And from that, they made a Fiegels rule where you couldn't hit the punter. So literally, Trotter put like his helmet on Fiegels and smashed him to the ground. And at his retirement party, they just played it on a loop on a TV. The 5 seconds. And he hit by Trotter and he smashed to the ground.
Barbara, by the way, this is what happened.
I was dying over it. It was the funniest thing, just on repeat. I don't know who had the idea, but I'm like, that's genius.
Barbara, this is what happens when Harlan and I get together, by the way.
Hey, listen, baseball
No,
is the national.
I hope we're not making you dizzy with this highfalutin.
Not at all. Actually, baseball is a wonderful segue into Jesse Stone, because his relaxation technique, now that he's not drinking, is to pick up his mitt and keep throwing the ball into it. You have several scenes in Stone's Throw where he actually does that, so it seemed perfectly normal to me. So Harlan, I'm gonna sit back and let you ask penetrating questions of Mike. And if you fail, I'll step up. How's that?
That's great. Well, whatever. Stay and you feel free to join in. Hey, everybody, welcome. I know it's 5 o'clock somewhere, especially where you are, so feel free to relax and enjoy. I am thrilled to be talking with my buddy Mike Lupica, a legend in many different fields. I don't know if anybody out there doesn't know Mike's history or his story, but for those who maybe don't, Mike is probably, I'm saying, I don't know, I'm trying to think who would be more, the most famous sports writer of the last 30 or 40 years even. I grew up with him when I was a little boy on my father's knee.
Here we go.
Read to me Mike Lupica's column.
Here we go. Here we go.
Not exactly.
Yeah, okay, shots fired.
Mike actually was, from my high school years on, was something that all of us read every day, or however often he was in the paper. Every weekend he had a column called Shoot the Lip where he just had one-liners. And it was literally, we all read this. Those were the days when people read newspapers and there wasn't the internet. And I don't know anybody of my friends who didn't do it. And then one day, about 5 of my friends called me early on a Sunday morning because Mike Lupica had mentioned me in his column as somebody he had read one of my books. I'm trying to think, this is probably around 2000, 2001, probably about 20 years ago. And we had a mutual friend, so we got to meet and we became fast friends. Our families vacationed together in the Hamptons. We talked a lot about a variety of things, and he always had a tremendous interest in mystery and crime fiction and fiction in general. He was writing it even back then. We had a number of mutual friends, and it just became a lot of fun. And when he took on Robert B. Parker, though, you mentioned, we talked about this. I actually never met Bob in person, but I certainly knew him, and I was proud to be quoted in his obituary. In his obituary, I said, 90% of mystery writers admit that Robert B. Parker is an influence, and 10% lie about it.
That's right.
So I don't know a crime writer of my ilk. Now, I'm not talking about some of the young writers who are coming up now after us, but of my ilk, I coming up with Dennis Lehane and Laura Lippman and Michael Conley and Robert Crace and Barbara, the people, John Sanford, who I know you're having dinner with tonight. By the way, tell John I say hi. I love that guy. He's also been a wonderfully supportive friend over the years. I don't really know any of them who would say that they had a crime fiction writer that they were influenced by more than Robert B. Parker. People talk about before that, I guess, for Parker it was Raymond Chandler, But how many books did Chandler write in the end, Barbara? 7, 8, maybe?
Yeah, very few. You know, and we,
40?
Harlan, we probably remember Chandler better from the movie than we do many people. It's like the Maltese Falcon. I am convinced that most people who think they've read it actually just saw the movie, and I think that's really true with The Big Sleep and a couple of Chandlers. Yeah, and then you know there was Ross McDonald, but he was different.
Right.
There is no direct line between Chandler and Parker that goes around McDonald, in my opinion.
And Harlan, my
Different
pal
writer.
Joe Ede, who Barbara knows and has had
Yeah.
at the store, and we're doing an event tomorrow night, a Zoom event. Has written a Marlowe novel called The
great.
Goodbye Coast. I've read it. It's terrific. And if
Tremendous.
you haven't read the IQ books, oh my God, he's great. But yeah, you're right. Parker was the man. Parker is the man.
So how intimidating, all right, this is now your 5th Parker book, just so
Yeah.
people are clear. You wrote 3 Sonny Randalls and 2
Sonny. Yep.
Jesse Stones.
Yep.
How intimidating was that to start off with? I mean, you know, how did you, your first one was Sonny, so I don't know if you want to start there. First of all, how did it come to be? And were you intimidated? Because I wouldn't do it in a million years. I'd be much too afraid. And you've done it with panache. That's the funny thing. You sent me an early Sonny Randall, and I was nervous for you. I'll be honest, as your friend, I was nervous for you. And I wrote you and called you right away saying, I don't know how you did it, but you really managed to pull it off. So let's talk about that a little bit. How did it start happening?
All right. Here's my history with Bob Parker. I read the God Wolf manuscript when I was in college. I pulled it off the shelf, not knowing anything about anything, at a Brentano's on Boylston Street. And like everybody else, the first time they're exposed to his, I was just blown away by the sound, by the attitude, by the character of Spencer. And over the years and through our friendship, I bet you I read every Spencer 3 times. I read all the Jesse Stones, Sonny Randall, the Westerns. I'd go on long trips and I'd listen to books on tape. Joe Mantegna did the best Spencers ever. It's like Steven Weber doing. I'm so pleased, by the way, that Kate Burton does Sonny and the great James Naughton is doing.
Those are 2 really great readers. Yeah.
Yeah. And so here's the setup. My daughter rides, as you know, and I'm riding. We're going to take a 2-week vacation to a show in Vermont. We're taking a house. It's great. So I drive up, and I'm listening to an old Sonny. And so when I get there, and I'd forgotten that Esther Newberg, my agent, had become the executor of Bob's literary estate and was representing Daniel and David. So I called her up. I said, "How come? You know, the Westerns got continued, Spencer got continued, Jesse got continued. How come not Sonny?" And she said, let me call Ivan Held. She calls Ivan Held. She calls me back literally, Harlan, an hour later, and she says, write a sample chapter. I said, no. I have enough to do. And I'm happily writing books for young readers. And she said, Michael, write the chapter. I got up in the morning and I wrote, you know, he thinks I'm crazy. I write long. No, you write longhand too. Yeah. And
I think you make me think you're crazy, but not the longhand.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Good point. And so I write a chapter. And literally after I'd written like 2 pages, it was like my voice and his, it's like I was having a conversation with him. It became the first chapter, essentially, of Blood Feud. And it's Sonny having a conversation with Spike. And she said, do you think I'm getting older? And he says, that's a trap. And she said, no, the UPS kid mammed me the other day. And Spike said, I assume you shot him. And Harlan, I swear to God, from that moment on, I knew I could do this. And after I'd written one Sonny and about half, they asked me if I wanted to do Jesse. And I said, yeah, of course I do. And you know, from reading my column that, I mean, everybody has their own voice. Okay. So people say you're doing his voice. I'm writing the way I wrote my column, you know, but his voice has been in my head for 40 years. And so, and I said to you on the phone today, I should have been intimidated because I know how passionate Bob Parker fans are, except I'm one of them. So I felt like I was just taking on a different role in that community. And the reception has been unbelievably great from the start. I mean, reader reviews, PW Book List, everybody has all had the same thing. And the basic idea is that it's like the ball got handed off to me, and now I'm able to run down the field with it.
It's amazing. You mentioned Spencer and the Godwolf manuscript. I think a fun question, and people put it in the comments for Patrick. And Patrick, maybe you can add it up for us. I'm curious what everybody's favorite Spencer book is, if you have one. Barbara, do you have a favorite Spencer book?
Mine is the third one, the name of which is blanking out, but it's the baseball one, because I thought
Mortal Stakes.
Yep, Mortal Stakes. I thought he had written a book, Harlan, that he could never get. I thought that the situation that he created was one he could not get out of. He had painted himself into a terrible corner, and I just was blown away by. I love the one where the seven gunslingers came to Arizona and the whole bit, but Mortal Stakes. I'm lucky. I'm old enough to have read Parker in real time. Mike was in college. I was 35 when the Godwolf manuscript published, so I got to read him all the way through. I'm going to add, since Harlan brought this up, Mike, that when I picked up the arc for your first Sonny Randall, I was terrified. I was like Harlan. I was thinking, oh shit, there is no. But I really miss Sonny, and I nagged at Bob a bit. Why not more Sonny? And then you came to see us for that, Sonny, if you remember. And I was so relieved that it was, I really was. I just, wanted to hug you the whole time, like my puppy, and say, good job, Mike. Because it really was scary as a fan to see, Sonny. We'd kind of gotten used to Ace writing Spencer, and we'd had Michael Brandman, and we'd had Reed, write a few Jesse Stones. Bob only wrote 9 Jesse Stones, so all of the Jesse Stones has been,
I think you only wrote 6 Sonnies. I think by the way, in answer to your question, Cold Service was my favorite Spencer, the one that opens with Hawk being shot in the back and nearly died, and the Ukrainians have taken over this town. That's still my favorite.
Which is the one where he and Hawk are up in a different community. I'm trying to remember if it's Asian or whatever it is. The two of them, I thought that was
Walking Shadow.
I thought that was his best Hawk Spencer dialogue. Rob, we're now in an age of cultural appropriation, but, Bob was able to write Hawk, and people admired it rather than saying, wait, he can't write this black guy, because I think Hawk is magnificent.
Yeah, they're great. I picked Ceremony, which is not everybody else's favorite.
Really?
Right, yeah.
Why do you like Ceremony?
Right around, I think Ceremony is one of my first also. I came to it, I don't know what year I came to it, probably the early 90s, late 80s, early 90s. So I don't know how far into it was, but I just thought that was a really funny one from beginning to end. Anyway, so people, you can put yours in and we'll go through it. I remember I was very friendly with Bob's editor at the time, and I remember her calling me saying, I'm going to send you the new Parker, which she always did. I'm like, oh, great. And he goes, it's not Spencer. It's this guy named Jesse Stone. And he goes, the first thing you'll notice are their paragraphs. Like, there are paragraphs like almost the full page. Because Bob was, especially Spencer was, but he's just, I'll never forget, that's what she said to me, his own editor. There's long paragraphs. Was that at all an issue for you, Mike, or did you make it more just for you, your own style?
It's a different vibe. I think we had this conversation. It's a different vibe for me writing Jesse. Okay, and Jesse's funny. Molly and Sue are funny, but there is a darker side to Jesse's personality, and I think, and it's the difference between first person and third person. Jesse's a tight third person. I in the first one, Fool's Paradise, for the first time, really in the history of those books, I wrote a lot from Molly's point of view. I always felt that Molly was an unbelievable character and such an interesting, strong female character. And she's got a huge part, as you know, in this book, in Stone's Throw. I mean, she shoots and gets shot at and gets hit and is a real cop. And there's a scene where she gets into a very tough situation, and she said, Jesse said, "You should have called for backup." And she said, "I learned not calling for backup from the master," meaning him. Okay. But the most fun part of this for me, because I set out to do this, was I'm not ever thinking that Crow could ever be Hawk, but I wanted a Spencer Hawk vibe for Jesse and Crow. This is like the third time Wilson Cromartie, the Apache badass, has been in the book. But I wanted a full-fledged role for him in this book where he becomes, I'm not really spoiling anything, he becomes Jesse's, unlikely analogy. It's like Butch and Sundance from hell, but it's that to me is the core of this book. There's a lot going on in this book, but I wanted to it's a buddy movie. For me, writing it, I set out to write a buddy movie, and people are liking that aspect of it.
But that was Parker. I mean, if you think about it, right, there's always, other than Jesse, there was always, besides Spencer and Hawk and Spike and Sonny, but even when they were gone for a while, Vinny would come in, or somebody else would come in and play that particular role. There's no question. I've always, when I created Myron and Wynn,
Right.
I always love, it could be Gregory Hines and Billy Crystal and Running Scared. I love the buddy thing, and I know you do too. I think I think that's super important, but how do you put that where do you list that in the category of what you're trying to accomplish with these books?
Yeah, no, this one specifically in Fool's Paradise, my first Jesse, it's Molly and Jesse again, okay, but again, an expanded role for Molly. And, they have a complicated relationship. She's his best friend. There's never, ever been any sexual tension between them. Bob took that off the table pretty early on. And it would almost be like a brother and sister thing now with the two of them. But with Crow, and they trust each other, they don't trust each other. And Crow has killed people. Crow took off in a boat at the end of one book with millions of dollars. Then he came back looking for a girl named Amber Francisco later on, and he got on the right side of things. But you're right, Vinnie Morris, I can't keep him out of these books. I can't keep him out of Sonny. I can't keep him out of Jesse, because he's just such a fastidious, well-dressed, but a these does and don't guy. And Tony Marcus, Harlan, the black gangster, okay, from Buddy's Fox, who has gone throughout the Spencer books, it's like eating ice cream for me, putting him in. There was a way to get him into this book. There's a chapter later on. Sarah Minich, who was the editor for all 5 of those books, she's stopped doing this now. I did not drive her out of the business. She's brilliant. That chapter where Jesse is in everybody's memory, the first cop to ever go to Tony's office at Buddy's Fox, and it's the ensemble. It's like, why did Ed Asner die and hit us so hard? Because it was that whole cast that we were in love with, okay? And Bob Parker created this world of interesting people. Spike in the Sonny books is one of the most interesting. I'm thinking I'd say he's Robin to Sonny's Batman, except Spike would have a joke about tights and a cape but it's a nice sandbox to get to play in. Let me put it that way. It's a nice sandbox to get to play in.
I think you hit on. I think it's similar. One of the few things that's probably similar to certain TV series where you just want to spend time with these people. I mean, and as you're
Yes.
reading Jesse Stone, as you're reading Stone's Throw, Robert B. Parker Stone's Throw by Michael Lupica, for those just tuned in. It's just, you just want to, I mean, yes, of course, the mystery is important and the driving force. And no one, you don't have to tell anybody about narrative drive or twists than me. But it's really, I think the true joy is that you are just hanging out with these people. If they were just sitting talking, I said one of the things that you want when a character is, if you're in a bar and that guy's talking, do I want to listen in on what he's saying? And everybody here does that, don't you think?
Yeah, Harlan and I had this conversation as recently as this afternoon. At the end of the day, we all try to come up with a tricky plot, okay? Not as tricky as Harlan's, okay? Because my game with Harlan is when I think I've got it, sometimes I do have it, but then I forget there's like 8 more pages left in the book. And it's gonna be, I'm gonna be like poor Jeff Feagles, okay? He's going to take my helmet off and beat me with it and say, oh, little guy, did you think you had it figured out? Well, you didn't have it figured out, okay? But at the end of the day, you gotta wanna hang with them for 300 pages or 320 or 330 or 350. You gotta wanna be with Sonny and Spike. You wanna be in the Paradise Police Department with Suit and Molly and Jesse. And you wanna go to Daisy's restaurant and have her say snarky things. And you wanna figure out whether Jesse and Sonny are gonna end up together. Well, spoiler alert, except it's on the first page of this book, Jesse and Sonny are not together in Stone's Throw. They're having a relationship timeout. But if you don't like Jesse Stone and you don't care about him, if you're not invested in him continuing to stay sober or continuing to deal with the sadness of having his minor league baseball career ended by an injury, he's recalling a conversation with Sonny at the beginning of this book, and Jesse says, the worst day she said, what do you miss more, drinking or baseball? And he said, baseball. He said, because the worst day I ever had drinking was the worst day I ever had. And he said, the worst day I ever had in baseball was great.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
that was a very powerful line, I think. And I'm really glad that Jen is no longer in the picture. Bob had a tendency, to drag out these totally dysfunctional male-female relationships. And I don't think he was, Jesse was never really going to get sober, which is a huge struggle for him, I think, if Jen were in the picture. So I'm glad, and I won't bring up why, but I really like one feature in this book a lot. So thank you very much for introducing new things to Jesse. Because
Jesse, yes,
I
thank
really
you.
like that.
Thank you.
And I yelled at you in our last conversation about Jesse and Sonny. So, I thought that it would be good if they took a time out. So thank you for doing that.
Barbara, would you say that what we're talking about is a nice surprise at the end of this
Very
book?
nice.
Okay,
Actually,
good.
I was astonished.
We'll leave it at
No,
that.
you have to know the whole Parker universe to truly appreciate it. Not just the Jesse Stone. You have to know the Spencer and really Sonny as well. No, I absolutely loved it. I was so pleased. I would have written you a thank you note, except that I knew I'd talk to you. Now we're going to drive everybody watching this insane, right? Because you're going to have to read, and you're going to have to read it all the way to the end.
Really, all the way to
You know what we're talking about.
Yeah, no, it's like a Coben book. You really have to read it all the way.
Yeah, I know. Win just drove me crazy. I'm with you. I thought when I was reading Win that I knew where we were going, and you rat, Harlan, you absolutely, it's like magic mirrors. I don't know how you do it.
Well, thank you, I guess. Thanks. First of all, wasn't a question. I mean, everybody I know, I'm sure most of the people, or 99% of the people who are watching right now, and the Poison Pen clientele know the Parker universe. But are you cognizant when you're starting that this could be somebody's very first Jesse Stone? So, I mean, my always answer to this is every book starts a certain stage. So if I wrote the first Myron, he was 27 or 28. So it's not like you read a book when he was 17. And now if you read a book and he's 40 or 41, you're just starting there, and I'm trying not to repeat myself and trying to do that. But how cognizant of you, or do you not worry about that at all and just figure, if you've already read some Jesse Stones, you know who they are?
Yeah, no, I I'm very aware of it. And I think sometimes it gets edited out because I'm just, I don't, I don't like to do a lot of backstory. I like to stay in the moment, as my friend Jim Patterson says, stay in the scene, stay in the moment. But I try to just drop enough in to give just some historical context to who these people are. But you're right. There comes a point is at this point, if you're a fan of these stories and these characters, and you don't know who Benny Morris is at this point, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I cannot throw you a life preserver, but I hope you enjoy him and just assume that there's a good reason why he's in this scene.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Norm would enter Cheers, right?
Right.
You know who Norm is, you already have the laugh going, but if you don't, you're still going to laugh. You'll learn, you'll pick it up pretty quickly.
Yeah, it's like, again, Ed Asner's in my brain because I went back the other day. In fact, I tweeted it out, that original scene, you've got spunk. I hate spunk, but Carlin, things were fun. That show was brilliant. And it was brilliantly written, except those things were funnier as they went along because we knew them. Our sense of those characters made that material even better than it already was. And we're kind of in that, that same boat. I mean, you're writing more standalones now, okay? But Myron and Wynn, there was a shorthand in that conversation that you could do, and you just had to assume that people knew that this back and forth was rooted in friendship and history and all the trials that they've been through.
Well, I think I saw Ed Asner was like 40 when he did that scene. We think of him like he must have been 70 then.
I know.
40 years old when he first started on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, which is freaky. I'm going to mention there's many things about Mike's career that I admire and have made me envious, but I think perhaps your greatest moment. You probably know, maybe you don't know what I'm going to say, but you probably do. And for those who've seen the episode, there's an episode of Seinfeld. George Costanza is asked, who is it, when he's applying for a job at the real publishing house, and he's asked who his favorite writer is, and the only one he could come up with is Mike Lupica. And it becomes a running joke in the episode about, and you're like, wait, the sports writer? He's trying like a novelist. And so I want to ask you, first of all, how did you find out that was going to happen? I
didn't find out until it happened. It was a Thursday night when I think Taylor and I were out, and I did not watch Seinfeld that night. And again, this is like 1993, maybe. The whole world is calling me the next day. And you know how it goes with these things. That's that game where you used to tell a joke at a party, and then the next person would tell a joke. And like some people didn't even have the show right. They had it in a different. And so anyway, again, in a different world where you can go to YouTube or Hulu or wherever and see it, the great Dolores Thompson, who was my assistant at the Daily News, I said, call out to LA and see if you can get me a cassette. That's how, okay?
Right.
About a week later, a FedEx shows up for me with the cassette and a note from Larry David. And the note is, I don't know whether you know or not that I'm a native New Yorker, but this was just my way of saying thanks for all the years of great columns. And that moment began our friendship. We are friends to this day. We play golf together when we get the chance. But it started, we go to ball games, and that it started as innocently, with Seinfeld now, every 6 months, somebody will see that show. And Jason Alexander is so great in that moment because he's completely flummoxed trying to come up with a writer, and he blurts out my name, and the stuffy editor says, who? And Jason Alexander says, sports writer from the Daily News, very insightful.
It's funny how these things get repeated. I'm friendly with George Stephanopoulos. My daughters have gotten to know him over the years, and they were watching a Friends episode recently where Jennifer Aniston and Courtney Cox learn he moved next door, so they're trying to check him out because he's so hot, and they're like, "Oh, George." It's like, yeah, this was a number of years ago when
I used to also, I used to joke with friends of mine that there should be an Emmy category if your name is used in a television show, you know.
You definitely
So
would have won it that year. It
I
was a
used,
great line too. I remember cracking up watching it. I didn't know you back then. I knew you because I was reading you, but I didn't. We weren't friends back then. But that was a great moment. I'm going to switch gears a little bit because I know we have a lot of people also on who are writers, and you have written a ton. You had a column. You have young adult novels. You have even younger kid novels. You have written already in the last, has it been not even 5 years? You've written 5 of these Parker books in what, 3.5 years, maybe?
I have written them in 3.5 years, and
So
and there's 2 books with Mr. Patterson that nobody's seen yet that'll be out.
you're writing with James Patterson now as well. So everybody's going to want to know, how do you budget your time? Tell us a little bit about your writing schedule, how you work, the discipline that you have to be able to write this much.
Well, first of all, I'm preaching to the choir with what I'm about to say. If somebody had told me that the problem would be budgeting time to get to do this kind of work with this kind of subject matter when I was a kid, I would have said, sign me up for all of the budgeting thing. Because it's just, as Bill Goldman used to say to both of us, all I ever wanted to do was tell my stories. Okay. And so I get up early in the morning, I walk the dogs, and I go into this room that I'm sitting in, and I've got a writing table that I've had since my apartment in New York City in the 1980s. It has made every move with me. Someday I want to figure out how many novels have been written on this table. And on one side of the desk, I've got this that I was working on today, which is something. And then I work till I can't, and I do other things. And then in the afternoon, if I've got another project I'm working on, I work on that with a completely fresh brain. And sometimes I'll leave it, this sounds nuts, right on different sides of the table or in a different room. But I write longhand.
Notebooks for different books? You don't write in the different notebooks for different books?
I have the same notebooks. I have these, I used to write on yellow legal pads, and Elmore Leonard was at the house one time. He said, why are you worrying about writing in the lines? So now I order like 40 of these tablets at a time. And I write longhand, and sometimes it's 20 pages and I'll type, or sometimes it's 40. And sometimes if I get going good, it'll be 60 pages. But then when I put it into my laptop, it's like a second draft. I fixed so much stuff. And again, as a newspaper columnist, Harlan, I never had the luxury of writer's block. I never had the luxury of calling my editor and say, I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling it today. And he would say, no, we have this space on, that we've allotted for you, and we'd like you to fill it. And so, I'm sure you're the exact same way. I always know when I'm getting near the end of a book because I'm already thinking about there's another story that has shown up in one of my notebooks. And again, it's all I ever wanted to do. I mean, I wanted to be a newspaper columnist in New York, and I wanted to write books. Jimmy Breslin did that. The great Pete Hamill did that. And so I never feel stressed at this. I mean, we all get to, there's always a point, I think I said to you one time, I'm afraid of page 100. I get to page 100 and it's like I'm in a deep, dark forest, but we always write our way out of it. But again, these are problems out of being blessed to get to do this kind of work.
There's 2 things I want to comment on that. I agree with almost everything you said, pretty much. But 2 things. One is that I do something similar. I have my notebooks here too. Sometimes I'll write directly on the laptop. I'll do whatever makes me write. So some days it's going
right.
But most days I do the same thing. And exactly for that reason, there's something very, I don't have lines on mine either. You can't read it. I'm not worried about holding it up. But there's something I think freeing and childlike about hand to paper.
Oh.
I think when you cross out, it's not deleted. You could still read through it. You can draw arrows.
Yep.
Lines. And I've used that line a million times also. when I then put it in the laptop, which is usually about 10 to 20 to 30 pages after I'm doing it, your first draft is now your second draft.
Yep.
And that can't be stressed enough.
Right.
Your first draft is already your second draft. And that's so important.
You want to know how it started? And I was reminded of exact that brain to finger to hand to page. Okay. I was in a summer house with a bunch of buddies finishing my first novel. I wrote these novels about this TV reporter named Peter Finley. It actually became a television movie that I got to write later on. And they'd be sleeping it off in the morning, and I'm working on an old Olivetti, and I can't type even downstairs in this small house. And the only way I can continue to advance my story is to write longhand. And all of a sudden, once I started, again, I just think better that way. And again, there's times when I realize I have to build a bridge from one handwritten chapter to the next, and I'll go right to the laptop and I'll write 5 or 6 pages. And just like what you said, if it gets me across the water, I'm okay. But that feeling of having I've got a stupid amount of pens here, rollerball pens, and that feeling of hand to page, it just, I think, and I'm sure you're the same way. I write faster when I do that. And I don't care if I'm writing faster, because why? Because I know I'm going to fix it.
Right. That's always the key, of course, that anything that you write, always the secret is to turn off the part of your brain that says, I suck, because we all have it. Get it down.
Yeah.
Blow up that first draft, whatever it takes. It can be, you can even think this is a total piece of crap, but get it down. I compare it also to diamond mining. So you take out this ugly stone, but that's where the value is. Then the second draft, you cut it up and you shine it. Now it becomes something you want to wear. But that first stone that comes out of the ground, Jesse Stone, if you will, to plug the book one more time.
Yeah.
But that's an ugly stone is what's valuable. So you got to get it out of the ground no matter what it takes. Then worry about making it look presentable for other people to do it.
It's an amazing experience, and it is, sometimes what you take out is as profound as what you put in. By the way, I have to mention one thing to you. I mentioned this to you before, and it's in another part of the house, but by sheer circumstance, I also had a young reader novel come out yesterday called Defending Champ, about a girl and a soccer team, and a big game again, boys against the girls, because the girls team has been canceled because of lack of funds. The girl gets to go on, and the girls decide to raise money by playing this big town event, boys against the girls, and it's a very empowering. So anyway, that's a little digression there.
Just to make you feel a little old, so when you wrote Travel Team, which I think was your first young adult, right there. So my son was one of the first readers of it when he was maybe 10.
Oh, well.
And now I'm wearing this NASA shirt because he gets a job. He's going to be working at NASA.
Well, he went to Rice. He went to Rice.
Yeah. So he's that old now. Not to make you feel old.
No, I know. He's the right age, though. He's the right age. And okay, here's another quick digression.
We'll graduate now and read Stone's Throw instead.
Harlan was out with his family, with us, a summer where I was bitching and moaning about writing my first book for young readers. And Taylor, my wife, finally grabbed Harlan and said, talk to him, because talk to him. He has to finish his book. And Harlan pep talked me through, and he read some, and he said, this is the best thing you've ever done. And that book changed my life. I mean, that book changed my life. It sold a bazillion copies, and in 10 days it was #1. But I was about to throw it against the wall. And Taylor Lupica, I remember she said afterwards, she said, do you know why Harlan gave you a pep talk? Because I told him to, that's why.
I always listen to Taylor. Mike, not so much, but there's something where you are different. And then I think we'll open up to questions. Everybody's different. You do like talking it out. So William Goldman used to say was your starter and I was your closer. And we used to do that. We would, all of a sudden I'd be at home and I would get a call. It wouldn't even be like a hello. He goes, okay, so they're in the room over here. And I wouldn't even have to say anything. He just needed to talk it out while don't. That's
You don't. And
I yell at myself. There's a lot of self-hatred that goes on with me.
No, you don't. You're the guy who goes up the hill and writes the book and comes back. I am completely interactive. And Harlan has got the conversation down right. It's not, hello, how are you? It's, okay, so I'm like 30 pages from the end, and so they're there. They're in the room, and sometimes it's not like he'd get me out of the room, but we'd get talking and something would go. No, I'm extremely interactive. I'm extremely.
That was a therapist. Like, well, what do you think? Okay, so
Patrick, you have the most active subconscious, Mike, of anybody I know. It's just astonishing. Actually, I'm in awe in this discussion because the true handicap for me, if I were trying to write, I can't read my own handwriting. So obviously you guys have figured out how to do that.
Well, literally, so if I'm looking at it, I have to do it though right away because I'm looking at this now. These are actually notes on a thing I was watching. But if I don't do it that day or the next day, I'll have trouble reading it for real. My handwriting has gotten that bad. It's a skill.
Look, can you? I don't know if this was.
That's a lot better than mine.
That's better, right? That's like the last page I wrote today.
I mean, you're not going to be able to read that at all.
Wow, there you are. I mean, to me, a computer was totally liberating because on a keyboard, not only am I fast, but I could read the result. So it's awesome. So Patrick, you want to come join us?
Do the role of the hand. I'll do this role on like another laptop or something like that, and I'll look at it because my handwriting is that bad. Patrick, we got anything for us?
Yeah, I did catch one sentence on your pad there. It says, before we met Callie. Am I right?
Oh, before we see Kaylee.
Okay, before we see Kaylee.
Thing I'm working on.
Well, wait, mine. Can you read this, Patrick? He did it, bitch. Okay.
Oh, that's short and to the point. I've not been able to figure that one out. I absolutely love it. I'm going to say one more thing too in regard to something, Harlan, you brought up, which I think, is a really good point for a bookseller too, because we're often asked that, where should I start? Can I read this new book? And the truth is really, you almost have to read the whole Parker universe, not just the Jesse Stones, but to truly love Stone's Throw, you have to know Spencer the whole bit. So, that's such an enormous volume of work. I think the only answer is start here and then see.
Right. That's the other thing. I think of every great series that I've ever read, with very few exceptions, I rarely start at book one. I found Parker in book 7. I think I found Lucas Davenport because I'm thinking that because of Stanford. John Sanford was that not the first book either. Very rarely have I actually started. Then I'll go back, and I find actually most people with Myron too, because they don't love the first Myron. I wish you'd find it now and then go back.
That's interesting because see, I've read almost all of you guys from your first book forward. I mean, before I was a bookseller, I still did that, and so it's interesting to, one reason I love these conversations is that it's really a trawl back through, decades of my life in point of fact, because Bob wrote the Godwolf manuscript, what was it, 75, I think it was.
Right. Yeah.
And Tony Hillerman wrote The Blessing Way in 73 or 75 or something. So, it's been wonderful. Patrick has read an awful lot of things in real time too. Over.
And you know what I just did, Harlan, and to speak to what you just said. Well, first of all, when was the first Myron? What year?
95.
Okay. I'm late coming to him and I felt like an idiot, but I feel like that frequently. William Kent Kruger. I just started reading.
Oh, right. See, but I started with Iron Lake because he started it here at the store. I think we're really lucky that way that so many writers have started. I mean, Michael Conley's first event ever was here at the Pen, and it makes it hard. We're lucky that we have therefore been able to read things. We look for new novelists because I think an important part of what we do is to find new talent. And I fell in love with an author the other day, and I muscled up a whole bunch of guys. They're all political military thriller guys. And I got them all to tweet the event we're going to do tomorrow night, because I want this guy to do well. And I love the fact that we can actually do that in Zoom, I have to say, really makes it possible to do things that we couldn't do when everything was live. I mean, what were the odds that I could get both of you to the store tonight? Pretty dim, right? But here we are having this great time. I know it's not the same. And, we're going to go forward doing hybrid things, because I think it's so great that we can bring in people in very unlikely configurations to talk in a way that really expands, I think, the whole experience for the readers and for you authors too. How much fun it is to talk to Harlan, Mike, instead of just boring old me all over again. Anyway, Patrick, what do we got?
Well, I just wanted to give a shout out to Harlan too for helping so many writers and the TV. I can't remember what exactly it is, Harlan, but I know you appear on TV and plug certain authors' books.
Yes, you did. In fact, I saw it at the Today Show.
Yeah, that's it.
Has let me do almost once every 2 or 3 months now, where I get to pick 5 or 6 books in whatever categories that they had, and I think part of our job is not to get Pollyanna about it, but send the elevator back down. The same when I was coming up, you mentioned Dutch Leonard before, and Mary Higgins Clark, and Lawrence Block, and Donald Westlake, and Ed McBain, and Sue Grafton, and Tony Hillerman, and they were all so damn good to us. I mean, I was always in shock and awe as a complete unknown writer and going to a conference at how welcoming they were. And so for the guys that came up with me, we mentioned before, Conley and Crace and Lippman and Scottolini and all the rest, I know we all feel the same obligation in crime fiction, just as we feel an obligation to stores like yours. And I'm not an optimist in many ways, but the mystery in the crime fiction community, as you know, I mean, Patrick, I met you when I was first starting out, and you and I were hanging, and Lahane wanted to show us this little movie he made, remember?
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, that was in Monterey.
I've known you, and that was when I started touring with Lahane, and that was in the 90s.
90s, yeah.
Dennis Lahane and I toured together. I think we had about 7 people in events. It was right before, it was right before I wrote Tell No One and he wrote Mystic River, both in 2001. And our lives changed.
And George was just starting out too.
We were always welcome at your place.
Yeah. Well, I was happy to see you give a plug to Wallace Strobey, who I think is really kind of underappreciated talent, but there are so many.
Yeah, I love that.
Let's see. So some questions from the audience. Well, we have some comments about people are amazed that you both write in longhand, which is very cool.
Let me throw in a point too, which is that P.D. James, on the one time she came to the store, part of what we talked about is that she wrote all of her books in longhand. I mean, she was another one who really, like pen to paper. So
calligraphy, kids, try it.
Let's see. Jill asks, this is for Mike, were there any outlines or notes that Parker actually left behind that sort of guided you in direction, or I guess by the time you picked them up, others had already started that framework, right?
Yeah, I mean, with Sonny, it had been, I forget how many years. It had been 10. Barbara could probably help me. I think it'd been like 10 years or more.
Yeah, at least,
since he had written to Sonny. So I felt like Sonny was a clean slate for me, but I did. In my first Jessie, bring back characters from Candace Pennington, a girl who had been violated by 3 young punks in high school, and the ripple effects of that in their lives. And that's a very important part of Fool's Paradise. But no, I was standing on the corner and I got like hit by lightning doing this. I had no plans to write this kind of book until I asked a simple question: why hasn't somebody continued Sonny Randall? And the rest is now my personal history.
It looks like Robert Knott has a new one finally coming out next year.
Right, because that's the Western series.
Colin
It's been quite a while. It's been several years since Robert wrote another book.
Yeah. Harlan had asked about sending in your favorite Spencer picks. And of course, people sent in all different Parker novels.
Oh, good. What are they?
But Early Autumn was a good contender.
Right.
Looking for Rachel Wallace.
Those-
I liked Ceremony as well. And also The Promised Land was the Edgar Award winning one.
Promised Land was the first time with Hawk.
Right.
That's and Hawk's working as a lead breaker and a bat for the bad guy and switches leagues basically.
It's interesting to look, I do a discussion group here that I've done for 20 years now for hard-boiled fiction and things. And it's interesting to read novels as a time capsule too. You really get a sense of what's going on, in the background of these books as well. Let's see, Backstory.
Great.
Has a vote. Mortal Stakes, which is the one that Barbara was mentioning, right? Walking Shadow. I have a distinct memory too. I remember Barbara, we flew to Anchorage, I think it was, for one of those book conferences. This was towards the end of Parker's life, and Barbara was reading an ARC, and I just remember her laughing on the plane while she was reading the ARC.
He was like a treat because I have to read a lot of books that I wouldn't necessarily choose to read in order to do a decent job. And every time I would get a new Parker arc, I would put it, in a place on my shelf, and I would pace myself, and I'd say, okay, if I read this and this and this, then I can treat myself to Parker. Or occasionally, if I were really sad or sick or something, the one arc I knew I could pick up that would just be perfect would be the Parker. And even if the margins got wider, and all the rest of it didn't really matter because Bob could say more in a few words than many writers can say in paragraphs.
Man.
He really loved the Western too.
It was one of the few, I get a lot of books in the mail sent to me, but his editor always knew to send me the arcs as soon as they were ready.
The best. It was the best. It was the best.
You would figure a space and a time and a place, and you would always go to the top of they would always, no matter what you would do, it would always be calling your name until you did it. And, even the worst one, and I can't think of even what the worst one was, there's never a Spencer written by Parker that was anything but a complete delight. Some are better,
I agree.
but
What's even better? Elmore Leonard used to send them to me off the typewriter. I mean, he would literally, as soon as it was printed, and it was like one of the great guilty pleasures of all time. And the greatest, I think greater than any award I could ever, there was a time when he wrote Djibouti, and Greg Sutter, his researcher, kept calling and saying, "Did you get the arc? Did you get the arc?" And he said, "It should have been there today. It should have been there today." And I said, "Well, let me walk down to the mailbox. It didn't come." And the reason he wanted me to see it is because he had dedicated the book. Dutch had dedicated the book to me. And, when Taylor came down the hill and, picked me up off the floor, it was, knowing him was, I told Barbara one time, I used to call him when he's like 85, 86, I'd call him in the late day, knowing he'd still be working. And I'd say, "Are you writing or thinking about girls?" And he'd say, "What, you can't do both?"
Probably smoking a cigarette, right?
Absolutely. He only smoked for about 70 years.
always the coolest guy in the room. Always the coolest guy.
You bet.
Dutch was always the coolest.
That's one
group that we have to grow up of. This is the group that my guys are following. So we all know that it's we're standing on some great and some really cool shoulders. But the first time I met him, we were at a conference together in Italy, of all places.
Really?
And I heard he was going to be there, and I was just like so afraid and intimidated or whatever else. He sought me out to sit down.
He told me about that. Yeah, he did.
I was just like, it's like if you just got up to the major leagues and Joe DiMaggio pulls you aside and says, "Come sit with me, kid." It was just, it was an amazing moment. And all those guys and gals, and I say guys, I don't mean it in a male way, because no one was more generous than Sue Grafton. She was she was just, I love Sue. I'm still devastated by her death.
Our memories of Sue are so much a part of us. I mean, we had promised each other we would go to the end together with Z, because I would toy with retiring. We were the same age. And, I just couldn't believe it when she called to tell me she had cancer. And,
She
you
seemed
know,
in such great, not to get depressed, but she was in such great shape. But I remember the first time I met her too, she took a bunch of us out for lunch and she told us the story of how she first hit the New York Times list, like how that happened, how she planned it, how she worked, how, to help us figure out how to achieve our own goals. And then it was actually in Tucson, I think, and so they were just very generous souls. So those people who are still watching us after this hour and are Robert Parker fans, so maybe there's a few that are not so young. All those people were as great as you imagine them to be. And I think Mike and I and Barbara and Patrick were lucky enough to know a lot of them and can tell you they really were, they were the golden age of what we do. And it's our job really to try to live up to that standard as much as we won't.
When Elmore Leonard died, I said the only thing better than reading him was knowing him.
Yeah.
That's a very nice thing to say, Mike. We're turning 31 on October 3rd. And that means that, you guys
are 31 years old also. Thank you very much.
Yeah, but I never expected. I mean, it was just a for fun little project that I started with, because Rob wouldn't move back to Washington, so I could go back to the Library of Congress and be, a librarian there again. Yet Rob refused to move to Washington, so I thought, well, I'll just have a little bookstore. And I had my mother in mind. I mean, the original shelves were no taller than she could reach. And, she was kind of a store critic. I mean, it never occurred to me that it was going to go like this. I mean, it just never has. But
we're glad it did. We're glad it did.
Well, but it's been such a wonderful journey to meet all these authors. And Patrick's been with us now for, how long has it been, Patrick? 28 years now?
Not quite, but 95.
Yeah, 95. Patrick came to work when we hosted the first Left Coast Crime Conference out of California. There were, it started in San Francisco, and then they asked me if we would host one in Scottsdale to move it out of California and get it going around the West. And Patrick,
Parker was the guest too. Parker
and P.D. James and Tony Hillerman were our 3 guests of honor. Boy, that's a heart stopper, isn't it? I've refused to do one ever again because I said there was absolutely no way that we could ever live back up to that. And Janet Ivanovich won the Dulles Award, I remember, for One for the Money, because that was a sort of a bookseller award that we did. And, who knew? I mean, I'm really, I don't love being old, but on the other hand, I'm glad I've lived long enough for all of this to have happened. And guys, Patrick and Bill are the new owners of the Poison Pen. They own part of it now, and they're going to own all of it when I'm done. So,
congratulations, Patrick.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I know that.
Yep.
We have to start. Do we have to start sucking up to Patrick to the extent?
You absolutely do.
I mean, we stop sucking up to Barbara and start sucking up to Patrick, or like, could you suck up to Patrick and I'll continue to suck up to Barbara? Or
it was always my exit strategy was just to give it away. So so we're in the process.
I think Barbara's going to outlive me, so you might want to keep sucking up to Barbara.
Well, I'm not going anywhere anytime soon unless the 2 puppies just absolutely lay me out, which may happen. I haven't picked up this many. Well, anyway, potty pads. I mean, I thought I was done with diapers. I don't know how many years ago. Here I am again.
Thank you for having me tonight. Thank you so much.
Thanks, guys. I appreciate it.
Harlan, thank you for doing this.
Yes, to me, it's just talking to you. So
it's been a wonderful treat. It really has. Patrick, did we leave anybody out? Was there anything else?
On Facebook. Thank you for paying attention.
Yeah, I think people are really enjoying the chat.
But if we don't have any more questions, then our best strategy. Mike has very kindly signed Stone's Throw for us. We still have a few unclaimed copies. We still have a couple of copies of Win, Harlan's book from last March, and with any luck, we'll have Harlan's new book next March. Patrick, what's the title again? I've forgotten.
The Match. It's the sequel to The Boy from the Woods, where we find out his origin story.
How wonderful. That's actually one of my very favorite of all your books. I really love that book. So that's grand. I'm glad to hear it. And Mike, maybe we'll see you in January with the Patterson.
The Horsewoman comes out in January, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through the new Sunny. That's
I have a
next.
request. I have a request from Jill to bring back Sonny's contentious mom.
You know, Patrick, tell her I'm thinking about it. Okay, I'm thinking about it.
Right. And don't forget, Dan, if you're a longtime fan of Robert B. Parker, there is the most wonderful surprise waiting for you at the very end of
Thank you,
Stone's Throw. Yay, which I love. So good night, guys. Thanks so much
Thank
for
you,
doing this.
everybody. It's always
Pleasure.
an honor to be at the Poison Pen. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Bye.
All right.